Okay, so we're so glad that you've joined us for today's session. This is session 3 in the WVABLE workshop series hosted by Disability Rights of West Virginia and the West Virginia Developmental Disabilities Council. Today's session is titled Expanding the Availability of Stable Accounts Through Organizations and Entities as Authorized Legal Representatives. So for those of you that are not familiar with WVABLE, it is West Virginia's savings and investment account program that allows individuals with disabilities to save and invest without or while protecting their eligibility for public benefit programs such as SSI and Medicaid. During today's workshop, we're going to start off with a very brief overview of the WVABLE Savings Program, followed by our special topic presentation that is designed for the nonprofit or for-profit business, agency, or organization that will serve as an entity authorized legal representative, and we often refer to them as an ALR. And this would be for multiple WVABLE account holders. So this portion will include a review of the processes and procedures necessary to designate an entity ALR, a review of the methods for opening and managing new stable accounts, and a review of the reporting features that are available to entity ALRs. And of course, we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Your presenters for today's webinars will be myself, Roxanne Clay, and I'm with the West Virginia State Treasurer's Office. I'm the director of the WVABLE Savings Program, which stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience in West Virginia. Also, we have Thomas Hatch. Tom is the Accounts Operations Manager for Stable Accounts Program. Please also welcome Tiana Hardy with Disability Rights of West Virginia, who will be monitoring our chat box for the Q&A portion of today's session. So during this portion of the webinar, I will provide you with a brief and very high-level overview of the WVABLE program. So for anyone that has not participated in our standard WVABLE presentation and you want to learn more about the program, I would highly encourage you to attend one of our recurring webinars. They are an hour long and we cover the program information in more detail. I also go into more detail about special considerations and benefits that are important for individuals and families to know and to understand. Now here on this slide, you see a screenshot of WVABLE.com website. If you have an additional monitor or a smartphone, take a quick look at WVABLE.com, as I'll be referring to the site throughout my overview. The website is where you can go to learn more about the information I'm sharing with you today. This is where you can find the link to the dates for the upcoming webinars up here in the right-hand corner. And this is also where enrollment in a WVABLE begins. So what is WVABLE? It is West Virginia's ABLE plan. It is based on federal legislation called the ABLE Act that was passed in 2014. It's included in the Internal Revenue Code as a new section, 529A. The bill created savings and investment accounts for individuals with disabilities. Money that is deposited into this account does not affect eligibility for public benefit programs such as SSI and Medicaid. The ABLE Act also gave states the mechanism to create their ABLE programs. So while the ABLE Act does not mandate that states have a program, we do feel fortunate to have a program here in West Virginia. And our program launched in February of 2018, in which we celebrated our 3-year anniversary earlier this year. So WVABLE is offered to the West Virginia resident through a partnership with the Ohio STABLE program. WVABLE accounts provide financial independence for people with disabilities. The account is owned by the individual with a disability. They provide new investment opportunities that they did not have before. So for example, they avoid having to spend down monies in order to stay below the $2,000 asset limit that is set by Social Security and Medicaid. Individuals can now save for an emergency fund or for the long term. For example, a lot of parents worry what will happen to the child after they pass away. WVABLE accounts allow for the parents to start building a nest egg for their child to pay for expenses that occur now and to ensure the child will be taken care of financially for the long term. And WVABLE accounts also provide tax benefits. So just like the 529 college savings plan, the interest that is earned on the investments grow tax-free, and the earnings remain tax-free as long as ABLE funds are spent on qualified disability expenses. And then new as of 2019, there is a West Virginia state income tax deduction for all contributions made to the WVABLE account by the West Virginia resident and taxpayer, and that's dollar for dollar. So who is eligible? The requirements include that the individual is a West Virginia resident. The onset of the disability would have had to have occurred prior to the age of 26. Keep in mind, this does not mean that the individual would have had to been diagnosed before the age of 26. This would include the onset of the symptoms that would have had to have occurred prior to the age of 26. Also, you do not have to open the account before age 26. And then plus one of the following criteria. The individual is eligible to receive SSI or SSDI due to the disability or blindness. This does not mean you have to be receiving SSI. In other words, it simply means the individual has received a disability determination by Social Security Administration. Or the individual has a condition that's listed on Social Security Administration's list of compassionate allowances conditions, or through self-certification. And what that means is the individual has a written diagnosis by a physician of a physical or mental impairment that causes marked and severe functional limitations, and the condition has lasted or is expected to last for at least 1 year. So this is the same standard that Social Security uses for disability determinations. So let's talk about enrollment, how to enroll. And let me add that one of our recent workshops in this series was the enrollment walkthrough. And that recording is available, and it has been posted to our WVABLE.com website at the resources tab. So just quickly though, I'll mention that enrollment is done online at WVABLE.com. At the top of the home page tab, you'll see open an account, and that takes you to stableaccount.com. Again, this is WVABLE's partner plan. It's relatively quick and easy to complete the enrollment. It takes about 20 minutes, but often less than that. There is a $25 minimum deposit required to open the account. This is not a fee. This just creates the opening balance. And as far as who completes the enrollment, the Federal ABLE Act requires that the person opening the account be either one, the individual with the disability, or an authorized legal representative. And the Federal ABLE Act defines an authorized legal representative as an individual who is either the parent, the guardian or conservator that's been approved by the courts, or an agent acting under a power of attorney. So this could be anyone that's willing to serve in this capacity on behalf of the beneficiary. And know too that the power of attorney is limited to the WVABLE account. We do have forms on the website at the resources tab too for this. And then also be advised that for the individual that acts as an authorized legal representative, they will be formally assigned to the individual's account and will be the only person that's allowed to transact on the account. And then new, just as of last month, October 2021, the following additional authorized representatives may establish the WVABLE account on behalf of a beneficiary. So this is as per the IRS final regulations that were published November of 2020. They have included an expanded list of individuals that can serve as an authorized legal representative, to include a spouse, a sibling, a grandparent, or a Social Security representative payee. Now, one quick note I also want to mention is that someday our program manager for Stable, they are currently updating the online platform to include these additional categories. So if you were to go online today and to complete the enrollment, you're not going to see these additional individuals listed like in the drop-down category. However, We do expect the updates to be complete in December. And so once that has been completed, you will see those additional categories in the online enrollment platform to include the Social Security representative payee. So how do you fund your account? There are several ways. You can link a current checking or savings account and make electronic funds transfers via EFT. You can mail a check to Stable Program Manager. Quick note, if you choose to mail a check, you will need to complete and include the form titled Check Contribution. That form is available at the Resources tab of WVABLE.com. We also have envelopes that are addressed to Stable account in Rhode Island. So note too, for those of you that are familiar with WVABLE that may already be serving as an ALR, you should know that Stable account has a new mailing address that is in Rhode Island, and we have envelopes with the address included that feel free to reach out to me and I can send a batch. And then another method for funding the account is payroll direct deposit. This is where payroll monies can be automatically deducted and deposited into the Stable account. This can be done by the beneficiary that is working, or the parent or family member who wants to contribute a portion of their check on an ongoing basis. Again, there's forms at the Resources tab to get this set up. And then there's also a gifting page within the online platform. That is another quick and easy way to create a link. You share the link with others, and then once they receive that link, they can make a direct contribution into that Stable account. I want to mention our second workshop in the workshop series was how to use your Stable account. So Tom goes into much more detail about funding the account. And so I would just encourage folks to watch the recording of that, which will be available soon. So as for the investment options, note that when a contribution is made into the Stable account, the beneficiary or the ALR will need to determine how those monies will be allocated across the investment options that are included in the plan. So also please note that myself or anyone here at the State Treasurer's Office, we cannot provide advice for selecting the investment options. However, there is detailed information about the investment options at the WVABLE.com website at what's called the Savings and Investment page. So if you're at the home page and you scroll to the very bottom, in the second column, you're going to see Savings and Investment. Click on that link. It takes you to the full page with a lot more detailed information. And then, of course, the individual can seek financial advice from a financial or investment advisor of their choosing. And then, as you see on this slide, your investment options for WVABLE Stable account include the bank safe option. So just like a savings account, the earnings are very low, but it is a 100% FDIC insured option in which the principal is protected. And then there are 4 Vanguard mutual fund options that range from aggressive to conservative. So at the savings and investment page under performance, you will actually see a link to a document where you can view past and current investment performances across all 5 options. And then the reminder, the benefit of the 529A account is that you do not pay taxes on the earnings portion of the investments. Now you have money in your account, so how do you spend it? So money in the ABLE accounts are available for use at any time to pay for qualified disability expenses, and money in the ABLE account so the monies can be withdrawn at any time as well. So the legislation has defined what qualifies as a disability-related expense in that it must relate to the disability and it must maintain or improve the health, independence, or quality of life for the individual with a disability. Also note that the legislation is very broad in the interpretation of what qualifies, so there's not an actual list for the purpose that they didn't want it to be restrictive. So I always like to suggest to people to think of it in terms of what would not qualify. So gifting the monies, gambling, tobacco, alcohol use, for example. But some examples of the categories for qualified disability expense includes housing and rent, education, hiring a caregiver to help with transportation, food, basic living expenses, anything that benefits the child or the adult with a disability. Note too, when you do spend from the account, make sure to keep documentation of what the monies were spent for. This is an IRS program. They do regulate it since they're allowing for tax-free earnings. So be sure to keep an audit trail in case the IRS or Social Security were to audit the record. So as for ways on how to make a withdrawal and get money out of your account, know that there are no fees and there is no limit on making withdrawals. If you have linked a current checking or savings account, then that's also a means in which you can move monies from your stable account back over to that linked checking or savings. You can also make withdrawals by requesting a check. That stable would issue a check to a third party. They could also issue this check to the account holder or the ALR. And then there is a stable Visa debit card. They are a very convenient method for individuals that plan to use the monies in the account more frequently, for example, to pay for daily living expenses. And the stable Visa cards, they function like a loadable prepaid debit card. They don't come automatic. You do have to make a request to receive the card. And I'll note that at the online dashboard for the account, you'll see a digital tile that references the prepaid debit card. So you can click on that link to then request the card. So here are a few important numbers and special considerations to keep in mind about WVABLE accounts. Again, there is a $25 minimum contribution deposit to open an account. This amount creates the opening balance. And then how much does it cost to own a stable account? So it's $3.25 is the monthly maintenance fee. And that so they bill that quarterly. So it's $9.75 that is billed automatically within the online platform. It's just an automatic deduction. And then there is an asset-based fee on the investment portion, and that's between 0.19 and 0.33%. Again, it only applies to the earnings portion of the investment. Also note, the maximum contribution amount into an ABLE account from any source is $15,000 per calendar year. So if the beneficiary is employed, he or she may contribute an additional $12,760 of their employment earnings. So for the individual that receives supplemental security income, it's important that they know that Social Security Administration considers ABLE account balances that are over $100,000 as a resource. So again, once the account reaches $100,000, any monies in addition to the 100 start counting towards that $2,000 asset limit. And then just reiterating, as of 2019, there is a state tax deduction for contributions made into the WVABLE account by the West Virginia taxpayer and resident. Also effective 2019, when the account beneficiary passes, West Virginia Medicaid will not file a claim against the WVABLE account for any medical expenses that were paid on behalf of the beneficiary. So this was standard internal policy, but it is now state law. West Virginia was one of the first states in the country to pass this legislation in which there cannot be a Medicaid clawback. The only exception is if the expenses were paid for the individual living in a nursing home or a community-based waiver program and over the age of 55. And that is as per the West Virginia Estate Recovery Program. More information about that can be found at their website, wvrecovery.com. So we reviewed quite a bit of information about the basics to WVABLE program. And I want to be sure, to include our contact information. So that's what you see on this slide before I hand this over to Tom. And, I will also be providing a copy of this PowerPoint so that you have all of this to reference. Again, please note that myself or anyone here at the West Virginia State Treasurer's Office, we do not have access to the stable account. So we're not able to answer account-related questions. However, Stable Program Manager does have a dedicated customer service toll-free line where account holders can call for support. So now I would like to welcome our next presenter, Tom Hatch. He's with Ohio Stable. Tom is the Accounts Operations Manager for Stable Accounts Program. He is an incredible asset to WVABLE, and I just want to thank Tom again for taking time today to provide this valuable training. And so for those of you that joined us for our previous 2 sessions, Tom is a familiar, friendly face to you. And so I am going to stop sharing my screen and let Tom take over.
All right, thank you, Roxanne. And okay, no, we're going to feedback here.
I will mute my microphone, so hopefully that'll help.
All right, thank you. Yeah, great to be on with everybody again today. Happy to be back. Love West Virginia and working with the State Treasurer's Office there on these programs, and I couldn't be more thrilled to continue to support the disability community in offering these accounts in as many possible ways as we can. So as the opening slide shows or suggests, the general topic of today's conversation is going to be about expanding the availability of these accounts through organizations and entities. Ultimately, what we really want to talk about here is how do we manage multiple accounts in whatever sort of form or fashion that may look. But in some cases, that may include a company or organization or an entity. And what might we do to establish that in a way to make that work and function properly? So I'll really start from the first place, and that is by what do we look at when we're managing multiple accounts? What are our options there? So the first option would be that an individual ALR, again, we use that term ALR as an acronym for Authorized Legal Representative. So an individual ALR can manage multiple accounts. And so what are some of the circumstances in which they might do that? You would have something like if you're managing a small number of accounts. So maybe it seems logical, but if you were a parent who had multiple children that qualified, that had disabilities, then you might be able to open multiple accounts and manage those yourself for each of your children. Another example that I might give, I know this exists in another state that we work with, where they have a structure where at the state level, they can assign smaller companies, if you will, to be like professional guardians. And in that particular case, you might have somebody that sets up their own limited liability company, maybe John Doe's, guardianship services or something. And they might be given by the state a number of, wards to take care of. And they might only have a handful, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So in that particular case, it might just be easier if they're like a one-person shop or they only have 2 people working there with them to maybe set this up under their individual name and manage it that way, rather than going through the additional paperwork to set it up formally as an entity or an organization. That might be another example where setting it up at an individual level might make more sense. The second consideration would be your willingness to register under personal information. So when the authorized legal representative signs up for the account, they will need to input certain personal information. So if it's done as an individual, that will be there and that will be sort of within the account documentation. But if you do it under the entity level, and I'll use this slide here to kind of highlight these. So over here, if you do it at the entity level, sometimes employees don't want to register, under their own information. They're not the one representing themselves as the authorized legal representative or having the capacity. The company or organization has that designation, so they don't want to put their individual information on the registration. They want it registered under the company. But if you're willing to register it under your own personal information, great, you can do that as an individual. But if you don't, and you're more in the capacity of an employee, just simply managing this in behalf of your company, then the entity route is probably going to be more appropriate. Again, this could be like a single management structure on the individual side, where on the entity side, you can regionalize this, or you can create management groups. So an example of that might be, let's say a company has offices in various counties in the state, and maybe the structure that they want to have is to have somebody manage the accounts for participants in that county. So they may want it structured to where they have 3 individuals managing accounts, sort of subgrouped, and each have responsibility over that subgroup of accounts in their county and manage it that way. Well, that can't really be done very easily under the individual structure. You'd really want this entity structure to do that, and we'll discuss that in further detail. One other difference as well is that for the entity structure, we will be using a paper application for the entity application and for the setup of the initial beneficiary account. We're looking at making some changes to that in the future, probably not until mid next year, hoping to put some of that process online, but presently it's a paper application process. If you're signing up as an individual, you can just simply use the instructions that Roxanne had highlighted, go to the open an account page and just start through the account enrollment. I'll also highlight here one thing that Roxanne had mentioned. So this is just a little picture screenshot here of the video. It's actually linked to a YouTube account that the Treasurer's Office has, but it's a video that we did that walks through the enrollment process. Probably be good for all of you to look at if you're unfamiliar with that or weren't on that seminar with us. But if you're going to be signing up as an individual, that will outline for you all of the things that you need to do to get through the application enrollment process, and then including a small section, I believe, at the end of that video where we talk you through how to add additional accounts. So once your initial account is open and that initial beneficiary account is established, how do you add more beneficiary accounts under that same login that you're using? So go and check that out. That's a great resource out there for you. So as we consider that, again, with our focus today going to be more on the entity aspect, we'll kind of put aside the individual. What are some reasons why an entity may want to use the process that we've outlined to establish the account? And part of that is outlined here. So again, number one, many beneficiaries rely on entities for the administration of their finances. We often find that this is going to come into play for sure if the entity themselves is registered as a representative payee or those types of services are offered through them. But you could have some organizations that are also have guardianship, capacities and things like that as well. But if they're already managing some portion or aspect of the finances of the individual, then it may make some sense to have this as just another tool in the toolbox of options, so that if they're going to be over-resourced or things like that, they can have a place to park some of those monies temporarily, and then also facilitate withdrawing those funds when needed to be used for the purpose of the individual. Also, ABLE plans, when they were first created, and I know that we're only 5 years into this in total, and we're the oldest standing plan, and we've been around, almost 5.5 years now, so it's still a very new thing. But when these were originally conceived, the thought was more around individuals and families. So looking at companies or organizations or entities managing these types of accounts wasn't really in the original forethought, I think, of those that created the federal law, or in some cases the state laws. So we're doing some adjustments to how that was built out originally, or conceived or thought about. And again, not every family or not every individual may have the desire to want to do this or the capacity to do it. And so we want to broaden that spectrum of who might be able to do this in behalf of these wonderful individuals. Organization employees, like I mentioned in the previous slide, they may be reluctant to take on the personal responsibility of putting their name in there as the ALR. Not only reluctant to take on the responsibility, but frankly, it may be inappropriate, right? They themselves may not have the power of attorney or the guardianship order, or they may not be the personal representative payee. Some of those rights may belong at the company level. So why should they be putting their personal information in? when it's not their right to do so in effect. So how do we remedy that? And we'll talk about that today. Also, employee turnover can cause challenges in transferring of account management. So we do have a form that we can use to transfer from one authorized legal representative to another, but it's much more complicated than the process we'll discuss today, which is just replacing an agent within the company rather than having to deal with, replacing that individual who had all of the accounts registered underneath them. And we definitely don't want any kind of break in service. And so as much as we can facilitate not doing that, where all of a sudden the employee leaves and nobody can get into the accounts and there's a need to, we want to mitigate that as much as possible by allowing a structure in which there's always somebody that has some kind of access into the accounts, or can even call customer service and deal with the accounts as needed. So how does this function? We're going to show you an overview. This is kind of a busy slide, so I don't want you to get too caught up in all of the details of this, because we're going to go through each of these sections one by one. But this is kind of just the overview of sort of how this process works. We're going to start with creating of the entity, appointment of agents, creating of accounts, how transactions are processed and other supports that you can do, and then reporting. And this is one that we'll want to focus on a little bit because reporting is different and unique, and there's some really cool things that we can do there. But if we start on creating the entity account, how do we do that? We'll start on the WVABLE website. This is again highlighted by Roxanne in some of her comments. If you go to WVABLE.com, to the resource section, and I've highlighted that at the top for you, the tab that exists. There is a forms section within that resource page, and I've highlighted down near the bottom of the forms. There's two that you'll be interested in. The first one is the Entity Authorized Legal Representative Establishment. So that is the form to create sort of the shell, if you will, or the account. And then the one right below it is Entity New Account. We could probably title that a little bit better, but what that means is the initial account that you open for a beneficiary will need to be done presently on paper, and that is the form that you would use to do that. So once the first form, the establishment form is turned in and processed, then your account is there, and then once that first account document is sent and approved and established, then you have your first account on the system. From there, you can actually then add any additional account online through the account portal. And again, that was highlighted in a previous video if you want to go back and refresh your memory there. Or if you need any help, just reach out and we can always let you know how that's done. I've put a little picture over here to the right side of what the first page of that enrollment form looks like. So, this is kind of a little view of the first page with all of the instructions. Starting on the second page is where you will fill in information. These are PDF documents. They are fillable, so you can actually type in most of the information right into the form on your computer or device. But then obviously will need to eventually be printed out, signed, and mailed in to be processed. So once you've gotten those forms, what are some of the things that are going to be required to fill out? So the very first part of the form is going to be putting in information about the entity. What is the entity's legal name? If you have, your tax ID number or the governmental number issued to your company, usually tax ID or EIN, you'll put that in. Phone number, principal place of business, your address. I would say again, if there's multiple offices, whatever office is considered sort of corporate headquarters or the headquarters of your organization would be put in there. And then additionally, there's one other form of acceptable documentation. And you'll notice as we go through the next few slides that there's going to be some documentation required, because one of the things that our program administrator someday needs to do is to verify the authenticity of your company, right? And so because they don't have as many public facing customer information systems that they can use for a company to try to legitimize that company, then they require some amounts of documentation to do that. So if you're like a not-for-profit entity that has like a 501c3 letter for like a charitable or nonprofit organization, or articles of incorporation. You can send in a copy of that. If you're a for-profit entity, simply an audited financial statement will do. And I'll also mention too that a political subdivision or government entities doesn't really require any of these additional documentation, because they're not going to have, articles of incorporation, or in some cases they could have audited financials, I guess. But in those particular circumstances, right now, Someday takes the approach that they can do public-facing web searches on web pages and other sites and gather information in other ways to verify that governmental entity or that political subdivision, and who some of the key players in that are. So if whichever one of these categories you fall into, some of that additional verifying information is going to be requested. Once that has been filled out, and of course the documentation will be included once mailed, the next thing that we'll want to look at is who is the controlling officer of this organization. Again, should it have a controlling officer? I guess in some particular cases, just, who's the decision maker, if you will, at the top of the organization. So they are going to need to provide some amount of personal information. Now, I do want to emphasize again here, this is simply for customer identification purposes. None of this information will be attached to the account in any way, will show up on any reports or statements in any way. This is just used to verify, and then, filed away in the system, never to really be needed again unless there was a need to contact that person because of some change or something that wants to be done to the account if needed. But they'll be asking for the controlling officer's name, a date of birth, social security number, and a residential address. Typical pieces of information that an authorized legal representative or the beneficiary signing up for account would put in those pieces of information, and then that can go through a automatically generated what we call CIP, or customer identification program, just to again legitimize that they are who they say they are, and that they feel comfortable and confident in who they are. These programs want to be safe, and so we need to be able to identify who these individuals are. Once the controlling officer has been filled in with that information, then we have one final one sort of in the same realm, and that is, are there any beneficial owners that own 25% or more of this entity? As you'll see on the title of the slide, I put if applicable. I have not dealt with one yet that this has been applicable for, but it could be. So if it is, a for-profit entity that maybe has a small ownership group and there's some individuals that own 25% or more of the company, then they're asking for some additional information about each of those owners, if applicable. Very similar to the kind of the controlling officer information. Oftentimes that will be skipped over. That's about 4 pages you can skip, if so that's great. And then we get on to me, which is probably a really critical part in this application, and that is, who are the assigned agents? So let's define what an agent is in this term. We're going to have two. We're going to have a primary agent and a secondary agent. So the primary agent will be, in essence, the employee at the company, organization, or entity who will be in charge of the day-to-day management of the accounts. They will have access to log in and request contributions, request withdrawals, make changes to profiles, whatever things can be managed in that portal online, the primary agent will have access to do that. The secondary agent's role then is to also be there as a support, but they will only really have telephone access to call into customer service and ask questions, seek for more information, things of that nature. When Someday originally put this sort of concept together, and this was even before we brought them on as our program administrator, their thought is they didn't want to leave, like if a primary agent left a company, they didn't want to leave it totally devoid of anybody being able to do anything with the accounts. So at least you have a secondary agent there that can do some limited things while we're replacing the primary agent. And that's really the purpose for having the two in place. Now, one thing I'll mention here is, when you apply initially, that form only has one page for a primary agent and secondary agent. I believe they're on the exact same page of the form, and they are going to require some personal information about those two individuals. If you want to structure, like mentioned in the beginning, where maybe you want to have a couple different regionalized or segregated groups of people managing accounts within your organization, you can have more than one primary agent that will also have a secondary agent attached. So if you want to do that from the very start, you would just simply duplicate that page, right? You'd fill it out for a primary agent and secondary agent, and then you would print it out and then fill in the information for the additional, like the second, if you will, primary agent and secondary agent for your segregated group of accounts that you want them to manage. You can have as many sort of subsets as you want. The other key piece to this that I'll mention is that the primary agents, of course, always have to be different if you have more than one, because you'll want, their own separate login, username, and login to their account and their subset of information. But the secondary agent, to make it easier, could be the same person for all of the primary agents. So if that is something that would make sense in the organization, you could have a secondary agent that's the secondary agent for all of the primary agents above them, being able to fill that capacity so that you don't have to be naming a separate, unique, different secondary agent for each primary agent listed. So that's the terms that we use within it, but the primary agent's the key there. They're managing the account, they're doing everything that they need to do, and ultimately are in charge at the company level of managing the accounts that they've been given that responsibility over. So that is really the key piece. Next, once their information is filled in, we'll of course have a signature page there at the end, but you'll submit all of this paperwork to establish that controlling officer, to establish the designated agents. Someday we'll review and approve that particular documentation. I know in the picture I have there, it shows either approve or reject. Again, I have not seen one that they have just full out rejected, but what they will do is, if not initially approved, if there's questions, they'll just simply reach out through the information that they've been given to whoever's proper at the organization and seek for clarification or additional documentation or whatever's needed to finalize the application. It's not our intention to ever reject one of these unless it was completely false and fictitious information. But as long as the information's good, they'll review it, they'll set up the initial account. They will reach out so that the agent can start setting up their username and password to get into the account. If the initial application has been submitted with this application, that will be processed and the first account will be set up. If not, that can be done even after the fact, no problem. So once reviewed, then you can go ahead, as mentioned, to the creation of that individual account. This can be, as mentioned, done in connection with the initial application, or it can be done after the effect. But the initial account does require that paper, and then any subsequent one can be done online. And I will also mention too that if the information for creation of the entity as the authorized legal representative is done first, and that is set up, there could be the ability to submit the application faster through an upload feature that they have. So instead of mailing it through the mail, once the account shell is set up, you log into that account, and there's the ability, once you log in, to go, and we could tell you exactly how to do this, but go to a spot where you can upload that initial application for the first account. So that would just be a faster way of getting that there if it isn't mailed initially with that entity application. So just an additional thought there. One thing that I really wanted to talk about with this application. So we had already pointed out earlier where to get that paper form from. But there's going to be one real key point that I want to make about filling out that form that Roxanne alluded to in her initial comments. And I've outlined that here. So you'll see on the left hand of the page, this is the third page of that paper copy of the application. And it's going to ask for the entity's name, and then it asks for what the entity's capacity is in managing these accounts. So what is your authorization? And it lists currently 4 options. It lists essentially attorney in fact under a power of attorney, legal guardian, conservator, or representative payee. Those are typically going to be the 4 options that apply to a company, and you need to be in one of those categories to authorize you to then be able to do this. Down below, you'll see there's this checkbox here, and I know the verbiage is so small on the screen that you probably can't see it, but you'll see it when you pull up the form. There is an attestation checkbox that you would need to check, and you can read over what it says, but essentially it has comments in there about just, you know, if you're a power of attorney, making sure that it's current, that you're keeping the documentation on hand. If you're the guardian, make sure you have the guardianship paperwork on file, even though you don't need to send it to us, but just, you know, making sure that you have all of that. One thing that this attestation box does not yet include relates to the new IRS regulations that Roxanne had mentioned. So here's what I want to tell you about that. There is a unique nuance to it. So to the right side, I have pasted a version. It might slightly vary from this, but it's going to be very, very close to this, of language that will be added to that form very soon, you know, probably sometime in December, or, you know, I'll say by the end of the year. And here is the key to this, and I've put it in the highlighted section, and that is you're going to be attesting that you have the authority to establish the stable account as an agent under a power of attorney, or if none, as a conservator or legal guardian. And then it has in here categories, for example, spouse, parent, sibling, grandparent, or the representative payee of the individual. And then here's the key one at the end of that: in that order, and that there is no other person with a higher priority as listed above to establish the stable account. So here's an interesting nuance that the IRS put into the law when they finalized their regulations. They have expanded the list of people, or, you know, designations that can open and manage these accounts. But when they did that, they put a little rule in there that anybody lower on the list, and this list that I just read to you is in the exact order that the IRS listed it, that you need to make sure that nobody higher in that priority list has either the willingness or capacity to manage these accounts instead of you. So I do realize in the highlighted list I mentioned in there spouse or parent or sibling or grandparent. Well, for you as an organization, those designations aren't going to apply. But what you need to know is if for the individual that you're managing, they happen to have a spouse or parents or siblings or grandparents, then in a technical sense, what the IRS is saying is you need to make sure with all of those groups that none of them have the willingness or capacity to want to manage this account instead. And then if not, then you're fine to do it. How do we practically implement that? That is the million-dollar question in the ABLE industry right now. All we suggest is that you do your very best in whatever realm that you're in to try to establish that that is the fact. And I really put a focus on the terms willingness and ability and capability to manage. You may have a situation where you're a representative payee, which you will notice, by the way, is the very last one on the list, at a company who's or an organization or an entity that's managing accounts for many people. And you may know that, this person is a young adult. Let's use this as an example, young adult. So they're not married, so they have no spouse. Maybe their parents don't even have legal guardianship, but, really have no interest, or their siblings are too young. So that wouldn't really make sense. Maybe grandparents, So again, the point here is all of those in general, it's deemed as just needing to have an understanding, whether consulted directly or otherwise, that none of those categories of individuals or designees want to do this. And then, okay, you're fine to do it instead. So I tell you that because that is how the law is written, and it's something that we need you to understand. And I also needed you to understand that currently, if you were to go out and use this form right now, as it exists on the website, this additional language is not there yet. Again, it will be probably within about a month or month and a half. I would say that if you still want to use the existing application form and then designate yourself, whether it's power of attorney, guardian, conservator, or representative payee, you can still use this, even though this attestation box doesn't have this new language in it. But you need to understand that this language still applies, right? So it would still be in your best interest to make sure that you're complying with the nature of this language, even though it's not on the attestation form yet, when considering about opening that account for that individual. So if you have any questions about that, please ask that at the end of this presentation. I can just tell you how the law is written and how the IRS deemed it, and what we're doing to do our best to comply with it. So once that first account is completed, and you can go in and, as I mentioned, online and add additional accounts online, and that's great. Then sort of where do we go from there? The accounts have been created, and then you can go in to start managing them, adding funds, making withdrawals, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I will also again highlight that although it's not up on the resource page of WVABLE yet, it will be there very shortly, and that will be a walkthrough of the account site. That's one we did a few weeks ago, and so go and look at that, and that will show you all of the different capabilities within the account site, how to make contributions, how to make withdrawals, how to change settings, different kinds of things that you can do. So I'd highly recommend that once that's available. So next, after that's all complete and you have your at least first account, if not more, opened, then you can go back on and add more accounts online, just entering the beneficiary data only. You won't need to fill out anything about your, the authorized legal representative, because it's already there. That's you or the organization. So it's a very short, actually, when you add a new beneficiary online, it's only about 4 screens that you go through, just their information, their eligibility, options for how you want communications, and that's about it to add another beneficiary account. You can link, the beneficiaries like a bank account if you have that information that you want to use to electronically transfer funds from the individual's personal account into their stable account. So you can add those instructions and that information. You can also mail checks. And as Roxanne had mentioned before, there's a check contribution form out on the website that we would request you to attach to the check, but those can be sent in either for an initial contribution or to add additional funds to a beneficiary's account. Also, if you want to open up batch accounts, that is available. I would say, definitely we'll need to contact someday about that. They probably have like an Excel or other type of form that they would want you to fill out. But if you have like batch account openings you want to consider, or batch transactions processing, some of those kind of things can be accommodated if necessary. Those tend to be a little bit more rare. I haven't dealt with many of those since we've been on board using Someday, but that capability is available. For transactions, you have online requests via ACH from a linked bank account. We have, other paper forms. Roxanne mentioned you have multiple ways that you can withdraw money through transferring money back to a linked bank account, through a third-party check where you can send a check from the account to any vendor on behalf of the individual. And there's also the stable card, if that makes sense. If you're overseeing the finances for somebody who has the capability of using a debit card and wants that, one can be issued with their name on it, that can be loaded with the types of funds or the amounts of funds that they might need, and they can use that anywhere Visa is accepted, and go out and use that at their leisure. And that can be actually a great financial training tool as well. So these are all different things that can be done once the accounts are up and running and processed. How about reporting? So this is one I wanted to kind of stop and highlight a little bit, because there's going to be some unique things that can be done here. So online access to individual accounts for multiple agents on behalf of the entity. So here's where I'll start. Each account holder automatically has posted to their account quarterly an account statement and annually tax forms. And the tax forms are listed here. It's a 1099 QA and a 5498 QA. So those are automatically posted to each beneficiary account that's set up in the system. And you can always go in and download those, or you could request paper copies mailed to you at an annual fee of $10. So those can be requested either way. But in addition to the individual reports for the beneficiaries, at an entity level, we can customize and send you different kinds of reporting. So we have here on the second bullet point, pre-formatted transactions and balance reports for all accounts in Excel at agreed upon frequency. So what this might look like is maybe you want to request, can we get a report monthly in Excel sent directly to us that has just contributions and withdrawals made this month, and it's only listing it for the accounts that had any transactions this month. So they could send you a listing of that. And that could be monthly, that could be quarterly, whatever interval you might have. If you have a situation, as previously discussed, where you have maybe two primary agents separately managing buckets of accounts, each of those agents could receive a report like this just for the accounts that they are managing. But in addition, whoever the controlling officer is above them could receive a consolidated report showing the totalness of the program, not just each of the separate accounts that those agents are managing. They could see the two agents' information consolidated into a single report pushed up to their level. If there's some additional considerations for checks and balances, or somebody auditing accounts, or wanting to reconcile accounts, different reports like that can be produced and sent. Obviously, I like Excel because it's an easy way to move the data around and add columns and do things like that, and summate totals. So those can be sent out in that type of form or fashion, and then can be used to reconcile accounts, have documentation, be able to know what happened on that monthly or quarterly basis within each of the accounts that are being managed. So there can be a lot of customization and reporting that can be really great within this entity structure that you wouldn't get if you did it as an individual. If you signed up as an individual, you'd be given the quarterly account statements and the year-end tax statements, and that's what would be available. This additional reporting in Excel or in other types of formats of transactional history and balances for that time period would not be available if you just simply signed up as an individual ALR. This is just some functionality that we save for the entities. So a lot of customization there, and I would say you dream it up, and our reporting team could probably try to format and structure that report for you. And once created, it would just be put into a queue to automatically be processed and sent to you, or whatever email address you want on that interval automatically. And it's a really slick and neat thing. So to kind of conclude this part before we get to questions, just wanted to kind of give a brief pictorial summary of sort of how this all works in a sense as far as establishing an entity ALR. So this is my quick pictorial clip art thing. So you have the authority to manage the account of the beneficiary. And once that's been established, then you have the entity here, or the company, who has direction from either a board of directors or a corporate resolution, or if it's a government entity, you just submit, hey, I'm a government agency or a subsidiary type of thing. Then documentation can vary. You'll have the controlling officer at the top who will submit some personal information and probably be one that will get certain types of overview reporting of the whole program. And then you have your primary agent and your secondary agent per account subgroup setup. So you can actually have more than one primary agent. And again, the secondary agent could be the same underneath more than one primary agent. And once that's all set up, your structure is set up. And then again, what's great is that if the primary agent should ever leave the organization, then you actually take the one page of the form that's in the application that talks about primary and secondary agents, and you just fill out that one page and just say, we're replacing this primary agent with this one, and fill in the appropriate information, upload it or turn it in, and boom, we can switch it over pretty fast, thus trying to maintain constant access to the accounts into the system for your organization. So that's really my presentation here today on this particular feature we think it's great. We think it's something that groups should consider. And especially now that there's been the opening of the ALR description by the Internal Revenue Service to include representative payees, which I know in a lot of my dealings with organizations outside, that tends to be the most common capacity in which these organizations are functioning. And so that's perfectly legal and authorized to do. Of course, making sure that there's nobody else in that hierarchy above you that wants to open and manage that account instead. But, you know, should we do our best due diligence and find out that that's fine, you can take on that role and that responsibility, and you could manage multiple accounts under one login. And it's really, really helpful and really, really beneficial for streamlining how you open and manage these accounts. So we'll go ahead and stop there. I will turn the screen back over to Roxanne, but I'm sure, you know, of course, we'll have some time for some question and answer. So I'll stay on, and if there's any particular questions, just let me know.
Thanks, Tom. That was very informative. We do have a couple of questions that I will go ahead and ask that's been entered in the chat. So again, anyone else that has a question, feel free to enter in the chat. So Tom, will we be able to transfer existing ABLE accounts currently under an individual ALR to an entity ALR?
Excellent question, and I'm glad you asked that, because I should have covered that. In fact, I think I had it highlighted in there and maybe just skipped over that. The answer is yes. So what I would say in that situation is you would fill out the entity ALR application. Of course, you wouldn't need to fill out the first account application because there's already existing accounts that you have. And so once you filled out that entity application that's been approved, then we will work with Someday on the back end to migrate all of the accounts that are currently registered under an individual name underneath that entity. And they can help with that migration. That comes into a play where you could supply to us, for example, an Excel file with like the names and maybe the account numbers of all the individuals that need to be migrated over. We can work with the operation team at Someday. They'll pull those all under the entity structure, and then we can start rolling forward with, you know, obviously we'll need a new login and password for whoever that agent is. And then we can start looking at the extra reporting and so forth. But yes, absolutely, we can migrate existing structures under an individual name underneath an entity.
Okay, perfect. And then we've had a few folks to request a copy of the slide deck of the presentation for today. So know everyone on here that all registered attendees will receive a copy of the PowerPoint slide deck. So if to the email address that's been provided. So that will be sent out. Another question, how do you deal with a client if they have a legal guardian / parent, but I am the rep payee? The legal guardian lost payee because of lack of paying bills.
Yeah, so really tricky question. Getting back to what we presented, here would be my technical answer. And that would be that, I mean, you as a representative payee could open and manage one of these accounts. But if we look at what the IRS guidance says, you know, a parent or guardian does have a higher priority on the list than you in that order of who has the higher authority, if you will, to open and manage these accounts. So my suggestion would be that there would need to be some consultation with the parent or the guardian, I guess if the parent is the guardian, and just let them know what you're wanting to do. And as long as they have no objection or say like, oh, well, I want to do that instead, then by all means, I would say you would have the right to do that. But in a technical sense, you know, there could be, or maybe should be, depending on how your organization views it, some consultation with that parent or guardian just to make sure that they're not going to do it or that they have no issue allowing you to do it. Again, if they have no willingness or no desire, that's enough to say, okay, then I'll take over this and I'll do it instead. But again, on that priority list, technically they are higher on that list. And so I would just hate for your organization to get into a situation where you open one and then the parent or guardian or somebody comes back at a later date and says, hey, wait, I didn't know that, and I should have had the right to do it, type of situation. So it does get a little bit tricky, and that's also where I got into the circumstance where I don't think the IRS fully thought out this particular rule and how it would be implemented when they chose to put that into their rules, because it's, it can be a sticky situation potentially sometimes. For example, in this case, I mean, obviously, if the representative payee portion was maybe pulled from a parent because they weren't appropriately managing it, then how would they manage a stable account, if they opened it? Probably not very well. So, I think it would probably sit better with you as a representative payee, but I would just want to make sure you've done your due diligence to make sure that, everything sort of in a legal sense, if you will, is clear to do that.
Another question, and that's actually a very good question. I'm sure others have thought of the same in other similar type of a situation. Another question, if a client enters a nursing home, are they able to access the account as the rep payee? Would that account be under an entity ALR since it's a nursing home? I know most nursing homes are under the umbrella of a larger corporation.
Yeah, so another good question there. I am not aware personally of us having any nursing homes per se that have structured themselves as an entity and open and manage these accounts on behalf of individuals. Not to say that potentially couldn't be appropriate, but yeah, that gets a little bit trickier as well. I think if the question relates to, well, a nursing home itself, as mentioned, is just is a home maybe within a larger corporate organization or conglomerate or whatever, still at that point, I think going back to the corporate headquarters or whoever would be the governing official over those nursing homes would need to be the one consulted, in the capacity as the controlling officer, and then if they were in agreement that individual homes or circumstances within that organization, they wanted to give some authority to be able to set up and open these accounts, then they could go through the process of establishing that. But that is interesting because I don't have viewability into every single one within our program that has established themselves as an entity. But most of the ones that I have had a lot of contact with are more, daycare providers, ones that deal with the individual on a daily basis outside of, let's say, a nursing home setting, some other workshops and other places. So it's possible, but we just have to look into who's the controlling officer that would need to authorize that setup on their side.
Okay. And then we have someone that has called in that wants to ask a question. So I'm going to allow their mic to be able to ask. It's a 444 number. So the person that had raised your hand, your mic should have been enabled for you to be able to ask. If not, if you would raise your hand again, and I will try again. Another question, what happens to the ABLE account that you have set up for someone after you discharge them from your organization?
Great question. So there always needs to be an authorized legal representative on the account if that's deemed to be appropriate. If the individual that you're servicing has the capacity to manage their own account, that could always be a consideration to transfer management of it to them. If not, there would need to be somebody else, like the next of kin or the next guardian or the rep payee that it's transferring to, or somebody that's going to take over the responsibility to manage that authorized legal representative role. We have had that happen numerous times. We do have a change of authorized legal representative form that would need to be filled out. But yeah, if they're being discharged from your organization to another organization or to a back to the family or to another guardianship arrangement, then those other sides of the equation from you would need to be consulted to see if they would be willing to take over that account and continue to manage it. If they weren't, then that becomes an interesting situation because there needs to be somebody that has, you know, access into and the capacity and willingness to manage the account.
Okay. And for the individual with the 444 number, I have enabled their mic, I think on their end. I know you're on the phone. Perhaps there's a setting on your phone that you need to unmute in order to ask the question. Worst case, you can email me your question at wvable@wvsto.com, and we can get back with you via email with your question. So do we have any additional questions? And Tiana, do you see any that I may have missed?
Not at this time, Roxanne. I see them. I believe you've gotten them all.
Okay, and I'm going to try one more time to help this number at 304-444. It does show that on my end, I have enabled the mic, so. Okay. So again, anyone that has additional questions, or if you think of some after the fact, feel free to email wvable@wvsto.com. My slide deck for the first part of the presentation will also be provided. Tom, do you have any last minute thoughts or reminders that you want to share before we do the closing?
Not a lot, just, you know, I'm grateful to be on with everybody today. You know, these are great accounts for those who need them. You know, we do acknowledge that everybody may not need this type of account, but for, you know, the opportunities that are there to help them save, you know, funds instead of being resourced and not having to spend down, and then having those funds available later to be spent on maybe more appropriate or more desirable things. For those that pertains to, it's a super, super great program, you know, keeping their benefits, giving them the opportunity to save and or invest if they want to. But frankly, I do find that, I will mention this, most of the time when organizations or these entities do set up accounts, it's by far the most common, if not almost 100% of the time, that they put the money in the bank safe and not put the money in any of the investment options, not advising you as to what to do, but just suggesting that, you know, obviously that's insured, it's safe, it's not going to lose value. So, you know, that tends to be the most conservative and most reasonable thing to do when you're dealing with somebody else's funds that you have to take care of, and you want to make sure that those funds are there for years to come. So absolutely fabulous. But if you think this is right for you and you want to go through the entity steps, you know, definitely go out and look at those forms. If you have any questions, you can, you know, send them to Roxanne or call customer service. Obviously, Roxanne can get me involved if I need to be. But it is a wonderful way to manage multiple accounts in a very easy environment to do so. And then you can have some enhanced reporting features and, you know, the opportunity to really service the individuals that you're working with, not just simply as like a representative payee, for example, but in other capacities to help them manage their finances. So great to be on, and hope this was informational for everyone.
Yeah. Okay, well, I don't see any additional questions. And again, thank you so much, Tom. We obviously could not have done today's special topic or the remainder of the series without you. And I'll say that Tom is always incredibly generous to share his time and expertise, you know, regarding the stable accounts. Today's session, as well as our session on the enrollment and how to use your stable account, they have been incredibly informative and valuable tools for our attendees. So thank you again. And thanks again to both Disability Rights of West Virginia and the West Virginia Developmental Disabilities Council for hosting today's session and our entire webinar series. And then a special thanks to Disability Rights of West Virginia, Tiana Hardy, for your support today, and then Roy Mallory for providing the behind-the-scenes technical support, as well as making the recordings available for the public. Thank you all for attending today's webinar. If you have any questions that you were not able to ask today, please send us an email. We hope today's session has been helpful to you in understanding how to establish an entity as an ALR that is managing multiple stable accounts. And again, the reminder, all sessions of the webinar series have been recorded. The recording to the enrollment walkthrough is posted at our resources tab on our website. Session 2 and today's session will be posted very soon. It's been great to have you all with us today. So stay safe, stay tuned. We will be offering additional webinars as part of this series down the road. So just be on the lookout in our newsletters and on our Facebook pages for those announcements. So I will be sending out a copy of the slide deck as well by the end of the business day today. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.